Welcome. Today, we are stepping back to a single moment in the past, a moment so quiet, so ordinary on the surface, that almost no one at the time realized how much was at stake. There were no dramatic announcements, no clear signs that history was holding its breath. And yet, this was the day civilization almost took a different path. When we think about history, we often imagine it moving forward in a straight line, as if everything that happened was always meant to happen. But the truth is far more fragile. Civilization is shaped not only by grand empires and famous leaders, but also by small decisions, narrow chances, and moments where events could easily have gone another way. On this particular day, the future of society balanced quietly on a series of choices. A belief could have been rejected instead of accepted. A discovery could have been ignored instead of preserved. A system that later defined how people lived, worked, and thought might never have taken root at all. If even one detail had shifted, the world we know today might feel unfamiliar or might never have existed in its current form. What makes this moment so fascinating is not just what happened, but what almost happened. History is full of invisible turning points, where one outcome survived while countless other possibilities faded away. Most of those lost paths are never remembered, but they still matter. They remind us that progress is not guaranteed, and that the direction of civilization is often decided quietly, without certainty or celebration. In today's story, we will explore one of those hidden crossroads. Not to rewrite history, but to understand how close humanity came to walking a very different road and why the path that remained continues to shape our lives in ways we rarely notice. Let us begin. Long before this pivotal moment arrived, the world was already shaped by slow-moving forces that few people noticed at the time. Societies were growing, trading, and exchanging ideas, but they were also limited by tradition, geography, and the tools available to them. Knowledge moved slowly. Information was fragile, easily lost to time, weather, or simple neglect. What people believed about the world often depended more on inheritance than evidence. At this stage in history, civilization was not unified by a shared vision of progress. Different regions followed different paths, guided by local customs, spiritual beliefs, and practical survival needs. Some communities valued innovation, while others focused on preserving what had always worked. This balance between change and stability created tension, especially when new ideas challenged long-held assumptions. Crucially, this period was marked by uncertainty. There were gaps in understanding about nature, society, and humanity's place in the world. Answers were incomplete, and explanations were often symbolic rather than precise. Yet within this uncertainty, curiosity quietly grew. Thinkers, builders, and observers began asking questions that did not have easy answers. These questions did not immediately reshape the world, but they planted seeds. The conditions surrounding this moment mattered just as much as the event itself. Access to resources, the structure of power, and the willingness to listen all influenced what could happen next. A supportive environment could allow an idea to survive. A hostile one could erase it entirely. Many promising concepts disappeared simply because the world was not ready to hold them. Understanding this context helps explain why civilization stood so close to another outcome. The turning point did not appear out of nowhere. It emerged from a fragile network of circumstances, built slowly over time, where progress depended not on certainty, but on whether people chose to preserve, question, or dismiss what stood before them. The turning point itself was not marked by chaos or celebration. It unfolded quietly, almost invisibly, within a narrow window of time. To the people living through it, the moment felt routine, just another decision, another action taken within familiar limits. Yet beneath the surface, the consequences of that choice stretched far into the future. At this moment, several paths were possible. One option aligned with comfort and tradition, reinforcing ideas that were already familiar and widely accepted. Another path required uncertainty, trusting observation, experimentation, or a new way of organizing thought. Choosing that path meant stepping away from what felt safe and moving towards something untested. What made this instant so fragile was how little separated success from disappearance. A single text preserved rather than discarded. A method taught to students instead of forgotten. A principle applied consistently instead of treated as an exception. None of these actions seemed world-changing on their own, yet together they formed the foundation for a lasting transformation. External pressures also played a role. Political authority, social expectations, and limited resources narrowed what was acceptable. Those involved had to balance curiosity with survival, ambition with restraint. In many similar moments throughout history, this balance tipped the other way, and promising developments quietly faded out. Here, however, the outcome held. Not because it was inevitable, but because circumstances aligned just enough for continuity. The idea survived long enough to be repeated, refined, and slowly expanded. Over time, it stopped looking new and began to feel natural, even obvious. This is what makes the moment so compelling. Civilization did not leap forward dramatically. It took a careful step, one that could easily have been pulled back. The future that followed was not guaranteed, it was permitted to exist, simply because this moment did not collapse under pressure. Once the moment passed, it might seem as though the outcome was secure. But in reality, the path forward remained unstable for a long time. Early progress was fragile, supported by only a small number of people who understood its value. Without widespread acceptance, even the most promising ideas could still disappear. Resistance came in subtle forms. Doubt, hesitation, and indifference often proved more powerful than direct opposition. Many people saw no immediate benefit in changing how they thought or worked. Others viewed unfamiliar approaches as unnecessary risks. In societies where survival depended on routine and predictability, deviation carried a real cost. Transmission was another challenge. Knowledge relied on memory, handwritten records, or direct teaching. Each step introduced the possibility of error or loss. A single generation, failing to pass something on, could undo decades of effort. What survived did so not because it was perfect, but because it was repeated often enough to endure. Timing also mattered. Had this development occurred earlier, it might have been dismissed as impractical. Had it appeared later, it might have faced stronger competition from established systems. Its survival depended on arriving at a moment when the world was just open enough to accept it, but not yet rigidly defined. This uncertainty is what makes the survival of this path remarkable. Civilization did not move forward with confidence. It moved forward cautiously, testing each step, sometimes retreating, sometimes adapting. The road that remained was shaped by patience rather than certainty, and by continuity rather than speed. Understanding how easily this path could have vanished helps explain why history is not a story of inevitability. It is a record of ideas that endured, not because they were destined to win, but because they managed to survive long enough to matter. For every direction civilization followed, countless others quietly faded away. These alternative paths were not necessarily flawed or misguided. Many were practical, imaginative, and well-suited to their time. Yet they lacked one crucial element: continuation. Without support, repetition, or protection, they slowly disappeared from collective memory. Some of these paths ended because they were too local, tied closely to a specific place or group. Others required resources or conditions that could not be sustained. In many cases, ideas vanished simply because there was no system in place to preserve them. What was not recorded, taught, or shared widely had little chance of surviving beyond a single generation. What makes these abandoned paths so intriguing is how close some came to reshaping society. A different method of organization, a contrasting way of understanding nature, or an alternative approach to cooperation might have produced a very different world. Yet history remembers only what endured, not what nearly did. Over time, the chosen path gained momentum. As it spread, it became easier to follow and harder to replace. Familiarity created trust, and trust created stability. Meanwhile, the forgotten alternatives became increasingly distant, their influence reduced to fragments and hints scattered across historical records. This narrowing of possibilities is a natural part of human progress. But it also hides how open the future once was. The world we inherited feels fixed, yet it rests on layers of decisions that could have unfolded differently. By acknowledging the paths left behind, we gain a clearer view of how delicate civilization truly is. Progress is not a straight road, it is a series of narrow passages, where only a few directions manage to stay open long enough to define the future. As time passed, the chosen path quietly began to influence daily routines. Its impact was not sudden or dramatic, but gradual, woven into ordinary habits and expectations. People adapted without fully realizing that their way of thinking and living had shifted. What once felt unfamiliar slowly became standard. Systems of learning began to reflect this change. Methods were repeated, refined, and taught to the next generation, creating a shared framework for understanding the world. Practical decisions how to measure, organize, plan, or explain started to follow consistent patterns. These patterns made cooperation easier and reduced uncertainty, even when people did not understand their deeper origins. The influence extended beyond institutions into simple interactions. Trade became more reliable. Communication grew clearer. Problem-solving followed recognizable steps. Small improvements accumulated, reinforcing the belief that this approach worked. Over time, it shaped expectations about fairness, order, and progress. Importantly, this transformation did not erase older traditions. Instead, it blended with them. New practices existed alongside inherited customs, sometimes creating tension, sometimes balance. This blending allowed change to feel less threatening, increasing its chances of survival. What makes this stage so powerful is how invisible it often was. Civilization did not announce a new direction. People simply adjusted, finding that certain ways of doing things saved time, reduced risk, or made life more predictable. Convenience and reliability became quiet advocates for continuity. Through these everyday effects, a single historical choice gained permanence. It stopped being an idea and became an environment, something people lived inside rather than questioned. This is how civilization truly changes, not through sudden breaks, but through habits repeated so often that they feel inevitable. As generations passed, the influence of this choice extended far beyond its original context. People inherited systems they did not create, trusting them because they had always been there. What began as a careful experiment slowly transformed into an assumption about how the world works. Education reinforced this continuity. Each generation learned not only facts, but ways of thinking, how to question, compare, and draw conclusions. These habits shaped professions, governance, and social structures. Over time, they created a shared sense of logic and order that connected people across regions and cultures. Because the system endured, it also became more refined. Errors were corrected. Inefficiencies were reduced. What once required effort gradually became smoother and more efficient. This refinement gave the impression of steady progress, even though it rested on a foundation that had once been uncertain. Importantly, this long-term stability encouraged exploration. When people trusted the structure beneath them, they felt safer pushing boundaries at the edges. Innovation thrived not because the world was risk-free, but because there was a reliable framework to return to. This balance between stability and curiosity allowed civilization to expand its reach. Yet this continuity also carried a cost. Paths not taken became harder to imagine. Alternative ways of organizing life felt unrealistic or impractical simply because they lacked familiarity. The longer one system lasted, the more invisible its origins became. Across generations, the near miss of history faded from memory. What remained was the outcome, not the uncertainty that preceded it. And in forgetting how close civilization came to another direction, People began to assume that the path they inherited was the only one ever possible. Looking back, it is tempting to believe that history unfolded exactly as it should have. The systems that survived appear logical, efficient, and well-suited to human needs. Because they worked, it feels natural to assume they were always destined to succeed. But this sense of inevitability is created by hindsight, not reality. At the moment of choice, nothing felt certain. People acted with limited information, guided by immediate concerns rather than long-term outcomes. What seems obvious now was once unclear, and what feels stable today once depended on fragile support. As the chosen path strengthened, its alternatives grew faint. Records disappeared. Practices were abandoned. Over time, the very existence of other possibilities was forgotten. Without evidence of what might have been, the surviving path gained an aura of necessity. This illusion affects how civilization understands itself. When people believe progress is automatic, they underestimate the role of care, preservation, and responsibility. They forget that stability must be maintained, not assumed. The same forces that once allowed an idea to survive can also allow it to fade. Recognizing the illusion of inevitability restores a sense of humility to history. It reminds us that civilization is not a finished project, but an ongoing process. The structures we rely on today exist because past generations protected them, questioned them, and chose to pass them on. By understanding how uncertain the past truly was, we gain a clearer view of the present. The path civilization follows now is no more guaranteed than it was then. It continues only as long as people remain aware of how easily it could have been different. The value of this moment lies not only in what it produced, but in what it reveals about human progress. It shows that civilization advances through attention, choice, and continuity rather than certainty. Even the most influential systems began as vulnerable ideas that required care to survive. One of the clearest lessons is the importance of preservation. Knowledge that is not protected, recorded, or shared does not disappear dramatically, it simply fades. This applies not only to information, but to values, skills, and ways of thinking. What endures does so because people decide it matters. This moment also highlights the role of responsibility. Those involved were not shaping the future intentionally, yet their actions carried long-term consequences. Civilization is often guided by people solving immediate problems, unaware that their solutions may define generations to come. Another lesson lies in adaptability. The path that survived was not rigid. It adjusted to new conditions, absorbed feedback, and evolved over time. Flexibility, rather than perfection, allowed it to remain relevant as the world changed. Perhaps most importantly, this near turning point reminds us that the future is always open. Just as past societies stood at crossroads without realizing it, modern civilization does the same. Decisions made quietly, in ordinary contexts, may shape outcomes far beyond their original scope. By studying moments like this, we learn to see history not as a fixed sequence, but as a living process. One that continues to depend on awareness, care, and the willingness to recognize when we are standing at a crossroads of our own. Imagining an alternative outcome does not require dramatic changes. A small shift in attention, a different priority, or a delayed response could have been enough to alter the course of events. In that case, civilization would not have stopped, but it would have moved in another direction, guided by different assumptions and methods. Daily life might have followed unfamiliar patterns. Systems of learning could have emphasized tradition over questioning or observation over structure. Progress would still exist, but it might arrive more slowly or take forms that feel distant from modern expectations. The pace, focus, and organization of society could all feel subtly altered. Communication across regions might have developed differently. Without shared frameworks, cooperation could rely more heavily on local customs. Innovation might remain isolated rather than cumulative, with each generation starting over instead of building on what came before. These differences would not necessarily be better or worse, only different. History does not move toward a single ideal outcome. It moves through whatever paths remain open. The world we know is simply one version that managed to continue. By considering how easily things could have unfolded otherwise, we gain perspective. What feels natural today is the result of survival, not destiny. Civilization did not choose the best possible path, it chose one that endured. This awareness encourages curiosity rather than certainty. It invites us to question what we take for granted and to recognize that the present, like the past, is shaped by choices that may seem small, but carry weight far beyond their moment. Although centuries may separate us from this turning point, its influence has never truly faded. The systems shaped during that fragile period continue to frame how modern society understands knowledge, progress, and decision-making. Even when updated or adapted, their underlying assumptions remain visible. What makes this moment relevant is not nostalgia, but awareness. Modern civilization often faces complex challenges that require careful judgment rather than quick certainty. The past reminds us that long-lasting change rarely begins with clarity. It begins with uncertainty, guided by choices made without full knowledge of their consequences. This historical near-miss also highlights the importance of attention in the present. Just as earlier generations failed to recognize how critical their moment was, people today may overlook decisions that will shape the future. Technological shifts, cultural changes, and evolving values all carry potential turning points hidden within ordinary routines. Understanding that history could have gone another way encourages responsibility rather than fear. It suggests that progress is something to be maintained thoughtfully, not assumed. Structures that support cooperation, learning, and trust require care to remain effective. Most importantly, this moment reminds us that civilization is human-made. It reflects priorities, compromises, and persistence. Recognizing its fragility does not weaken it, it strengthens it by encouraging reflection. The past continues to speak, not through certainty, but through caution. It asks us to notice when we are standing at our own crossroads, and to remember that the path ahead, like those before it, depends on whether we choose to preserve, adapt, or quietly let something important slip away. When the moment finally passed, nothing in the world appeared to change. Life continued, seasons turned, and people focused on immediate concerns. Yet beneath that calm surface, a direction had been set. Civilization moved forward along a path that was never guaranteed, shaped by choices that felt ordinary at the time. This is what makes the story so powerful. History's most influential moments are often the quietest. They leave no clear marker, no sense of finality. Their importance is revealed only much later, when the alternatives have already faded beyond reach. By tracing this near turning point, we are not searching for a single cause or a dramatic conclusion. We are recognizing a pattern, one that repeats throughout human history. Progress depends on attention, care, and continuity. When those elements align, a path survives. When they do not, it disappears without warning. The world we live in now is the result of countless such moments. Some are remembered. Most are not. Yet each one contributes to the shape of civilization as we experience it today. Understanding this does not change the past, but it sharpens our awareness of the present. Just as earlier societies stood unknowingly at a crossroads, so do we. The future will look back on this moment as one that could have unfolded differently. And whether today becomes another quiet turning point depends, as it always has, on the choices that are made when no one yet realizes how much they matter. As we close today's story, what remains is not a single event, but a reminder. Civilization is shaped less by certainty than by attention. The world we know exists because certain ideas were noticed, protected, and quietly carried forward, while others slipped away without a trace. History rarely announces its most important moments. They arrive softly, disguised as ordinary decisions, made by people who cannot see how far their consequences will reach. Understanding this helps us view the present with greater care. The choices made today, often unnoticed, may one day be seen as another crossroads. Thank you for spending this time exploring the past together. If this story made you pause, reflect, or see history a little differently, then it has done its job. Until next time, take care, and thank you for listening.